There are habits that are formed by loss. For me, it's the old radio by the window. Every night I turn it on, not to hear the news, but to hear the voice of the man who has been with me most of my life. They say time heals the pain, but 30 years have passed. I'm still waiting for him at the top of the radio. I'm Evelyn Moore, 78 years old. I live alone in a small house at the end of Cedar Street, where once there was laughter between two people. Now there's only the sound of the clock and the faint crackle of the radio every night. In the morning I wake up early, make coffee, water the lavender in the yard, and say a few random words to the old cat. But at 8 o'clock, everything stops. I sit in the chair by the window, put my cup of tea on the table, and turn on the radio. A crackle sounds. Then his voice. "Good evening. This is Arthur Moore on FM 105.8. Just a few words, but my heart sank. The room suddenly filled with warmth. I knew somewhere, somehow, he was still talking to me. Perhaps it was an illusion, but I didn't care anymore. That night my niece Chloe came by. She opened the door and said, "Grandma, you're still listening to that old thing?" I turned around smiling. "Old things tend to keep the best memories, dear." She sat down in the chair, listening for a few seconds. "Is that Grandpa?" "Yes," I replied softly. "He hosted that show every night, remember? But they stopped airing it ages ago." "Maybe," I smiled, "but this radio never stopped." She looked at me for a long moment, her childish eyes mixed with confusion. "It's kind of sad, Grandma. Don't you ever get tired of listening?" I shook my head slightly. "No, because every night for a few minutes, I get to have dinner with him again." Chloe was silent. Then she picked up her phone, recorded a scene, probably to tell her friends about her strange grandmother. I don't blame her. Young people don't understand the feeling of having a voice that once made them feel at peace, then suddenly disappear. That night, after Chloe went to bed, I was still sitting there. The lights in the house gradually turned off, leaving only the light from the porch reflecting on the wedding photo frame on the wall. In the photo, Arthur was smiling, his eyes warm as if he was still looking at me. On the radio, his voice rang out again, "And to my lovely listener, thank you for keeping me company tonight." I smiled slightly. My eyes blurred. "Always, Arthur, always." Outside, the wind swayed the lavender branches, carrying the scent he loved. I leaned my head back in the chair and closed my eyes. The radio faded, but did not stop, like a good-night message from the person I had been waiting for 30 years. The next morning, I woke up early as usual. The sky was just getting dark, the dew still clinging to the lavender. I sat on the porch, sipping tea, Arthur's voice from last night still ringing in my head. 30 years later, the same show was still on at the same time, with the same voice, with the same greeting. Not a single word was wrong. I used to think it was a coincidence until Chloe started to get curious. That night she came home earlier than usual. While I was folding clothes in my room, she sat in the living room, looking at the old radio. I heard her ask, "Grandma, can I try the radio?" "Sure, dear. Just be gentle. It's old." She turned it on. Nothing. Just a strange silence. Then a few faint crackles, but no Arthur's voice. "Huh. Nothing's playing," he said. "That's strange. It's always on at this hour," I replied, stepping out, towel in hand. I sat down next to him, gently turning the frequency knob. Immediately the static disappeared, and his voice rang out. "Good evening. This is Arthur Moore on FM 105.8. Chloe's eyes widened. "Wait, it works now? I swear I just tried that." I laughed. "Maybe it only likes my touch. Or maybe Grandpa does," he said half-jokingly. I looked at him smiling, but inside, my heart fluttered. That sentence accidentally touched on something I never dared to think about. That maybe that voice wasn't just a recording. After dinner, Chloe decided to try again. I went out to the back garden to pick lavender. She was inside. When I came back, I found her sitting in front of the radio, her face full of confusion. "Grandma, I turned it on when you left, but it didn't work again." "Did you touch the dial?" "I did, a few times. Nothing. Then the moment you walked in, it started playing." I was silent for a moment. We looked at each other, then turned to the radio. Arthur's voice rang out slowly, clearly. "And to my dearest listener, I'm glad you're still here." I don't know why, but my nose felt a little stinging. Chloe was silent, no longer laughing and joking like before. She looked at me, her voice getting softer. "Grandma, do you think he knows you're listening?" I replied softly, still looking at the radio. "Maybe he does, dear. Maybe that's what keeps him talking." That night, I sat alone. Chloe was asleep, but I didn't turn off the radio. Arthur's voice was still steady and warm, just like the first night I turned it on 30 years ago. But this time, in the middle of a familiar speech, I heard a line that had never been on the show. "Evelyn, don't be afraid of silence. I'm closer than you think." I was startled. The teacup on the table shook slightly, swaying. I clenched my fists, my eyes glued to the radio, where the small red light still flickered softly, like a tiny heartbeat in the night. The next morning, I found Chloe sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. She was searching for something, typing away, her face strangely serious. I poured tea, set it down, and asked, "What are you looking for, dear?" "The radio station," she replied. "FM 105.8. I just wanted to check something." I smiled, thinking she was just curious, but then she turned the screen to show me. It was all old posts, a few yellowed news items from the archives. "Grandma," she said slowly, "the station shut down in 1992. That's the year Grandpa passed away." I was silent. "And there's more," she continued. "They said the last voice ever broadcast on that frequency was his." I looked at the screen. His name was clearly visible. Arthur Moore, senior host of FM 105.8. Beneath it was a faint note. Final broadcast, July 23rd, 1992. That day was the day he left. I clutched my teacup. Chloe looked at me, her voice trembling. "Grandma, how can it still play? There's no station, no record, nothing." I replied softly, "Maybe some memories don't need wires, dear. Maybe love travels on its own frequency." She fell silent. She bit her lip, then looked toward the living room, where the old radio still lay there, silent as if waiting for someone to turn it on. "Can I record it tonight?" she asked. "If you want to." I nodded. "But don't expect it to sound the same." "Why?" "Because what you'll hear isn't the sound. It's the silence between us." She didn't understand, but didn't ask any more. "I know, there are things you have to feel to believe." That night, she had her phone ready, right next to the radio. I sat down on the chair, as always. At 8 o'clock, I turned the knob, and Arthur's voice came on. "Good evening. This is Arthur Moore on FM 105.8. Chloe looked at me, eyes wide, and immediately turned on the recording mode. She didn't say anything, just sat there listening. His voice spoke familiar words, introductions, some old news, the theme music she'd heard for 30 years. But as the program neared its end, he paused for a beat. Then his voice changed, lower, deeper, so warm that I felt a chill run down my spine. "Evelyn, thank you for waiting." I held my breath. Chloe turned to me, her face pale, then immediately her phone went dead, as if someone had cut the power. The room fell silent. There was only the sound of my heart pounding and the scent of lavender in the air. A moment later, Chloe spoke, her voice low. "He said your name, Grandma." "Yes," I whispered. "But that wasn't a recording, was it?" I looked at the radio, the little red light still on, flashing steadily. "Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. What matters is—" I paused, my eyes welling up with tears. "He remembered." That night I didn't sleep. Neither did Chloe. She kept playing the recording, but there was only static and the old music. "Evelyn, thank you for waiting," vanished as if it had never existed. The next morning, Chloe didn't go to school. She sat at the kitchen table, her eyes still red from lack of sleep. Her phone was plugged in, playing the recording from last night a dozen times, but all she heard was static. No voice from him, no name from me, just a long, empty silence. "Grandma," she said softly, "I swear I heard it. He said your name. I know he did." "I believe you." I smiled, my hand on her shoulder. "Then why isn't it there?" "Because," I paused, "some things aren't meant to be recorded. They're meant to be felt." In the afternoon, she brought out the old tapes, the cassettes I'd kept in the wooden cabinet for over 30 years. All of them were in Arthur's handwriting. FM 105.8, Midnight Reflections. He carefully put the tape into the player. There was a crackle, the opening music, and then his voice, younger, clearer than ever. "Good evening, listeners. This is Arthur Moore, and tonight we'll talk about goodbyes." I paused. I remembered every show he had ever hosted, but I had never heard him talk about this subject. Chloe looked at me, eyes wide. "Grandma, is this one new?" I shook my head. "No, it's impossible. This wasn't in any of his archives." His voice continued, low and calm, as if talking to himself. "There are words we never get to say out loud. Sometimes life ends mid-sentence, and all we can hope for is that someone out there is still listening." I clenched my fists, my heart pounding. I remembered it clearly. The night he died, he was still at the station. They said he collapsed in the studio while the show was on the air, and they never found the last tape. Chloe rewound, then fast-forwarded. In the middle of the 18th minute, the sound was a little grainy. Then his voice came back, trembling slightly, like he was trying to say something. "Evelyn, if you ever hear this, I didn't get to say goodbye, but I'll find a way to stay." I couldn't breathe. I covered my mouth with my hand, tears welling up in my eyes. Chloe sat still, not daring to move. "Grandma," she whispered, "this is the missing tape, isn't it?" I just nodded. All these years, I still thought he left that night without saying a word. No one knew he had time to leave this, a promise hidden in the radio waves. That night, I turned on the old radio again. There was no music, just Arthur's voice, clear and almost whispering in my ear. "I told you I'd stay, didn't I?" I burst into tears, not from fear, but from the feeling. After all these years, I finally heard the goodbye he never had time to say. Chloe sat beside me, not daring to say anything. She held my hand, the other hand on the radio, and asked softly, "Can you feel him?" I nodded slightly, whispering, "Not with my hands, with my heart." The next day it was raining lightly. The whole house smelled of wet lavender. Chloe and I sat at the wooden table, the radio and the tapes Arthur had recorded between us. Chloe opened her laptop, plugged in her headphones, trying to analyze the sound on the last tape, the one we had found last night. "There's something here," she whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. "What do you mean?" "At the very end. Listen." She rewound. I closed my eyes. A crackle, a soundtrack, then another sound, soft but very clear. The sound of a door opening, hurried footsteps, and Arthur's voice. No longer the announcer's voice, but the man's voice in real life. "If anyone finds this tape, please, tell Evelyn I kept my promise." Then the sound stopped. A long, deep silence, then a loud crash, like a microphone hitting the floor. Chloe looked at me, pale. "That's the night he died, isn't it?" I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "Yes, he never left the studio that night." I remember that evening very clearly. July 23rd, 1992. Arthur called me at 7:50 just saying, "Turn on the radio at 8, love. I've got something for you tonight." I turned on the radio, waited. The program played as usual, but when it got to the end, the soundtrack suddenly stopped mid-sentence. No more familiar goodbyes. Just a long silence. Then the signal went dead. The next morning they called to say Arthur had a stroke in the studio before the program had finished. They said he collapsed right in front of the microphone, his hand still on the tuning knob. Chloe was silent for a long time. She held my hand tightly, her voice choked. "He was trying to talk to you, right before he—" "Yes," I replied softly, "and he did. I just didn't hear it that night." She wiped away her tears, looking at the old radio. "But now you can." "Yes, dear," I said, smiling a little. "Now I can." That night, I sat alone. I turned the radio back on as I had for the past 30 years. A crackle sounded, then his voice, still low, still clear. "Good evening. This is Arthur Moore, and tonight we'll talk about goodbyes." The voice spoke slowly, word by word. I felt like I was back that night, in the recording studio, where he still sat. The only difference was that now, between the distance of two worlds, we still found each other through this small frequency. "Evelyn," he whispered, "if love had a sound, it would be yours." I burst into tears, not because of sadness, but because I realized he had kept his word. He had never left. He had chosen to stay in the sound. Chloe stood outside the door, not entering. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, but still smiling. Behind me, the radio lit up slightly as if someone had touched it, and I heard him say his last words that night, his voice almost a breath. "Good night, my dear Evelyn." Then everything was silent. I answered softly, my eyes blurred. "Good night, Arthur. I'll see you in the morning." I still remember that night was unusually cold. The wind blew hard through the window. The lavender rustling against the glass sounded like someone was knocking. I was about to turn off the radio early to go to bed, but Chloe said, "Can we keep it on tonight, just for a while?" I looked at her. Her eyes were different, no longer doubtful, but the look of someone who believed. I nodded. We sat together, only the small light from the radio. "Grandma," she said softly, "do you think he can hear me too?" "Maybe," I smiled, "if you listen with your heart. He can hear you back." He touched the radio lightly, as if afraid of breaking it. Arthur's voice rang out, slow and clear. "Good evening, dear listeners. Tonight, we're not talking about endings, but about echoes." I shivered. It wasn't any old program. Arthur had never said this part before. I turned to look at Chloe. She was holding her breath too. "Echoes," he continued, "are the proof that something once existed. The louder the love, the longer the echo." Chloe whispered, her eyes still glued to the radio. He's talking about you, Grandma. I smiled, but my eyes stung. Maybe about all of us, dear. Everyone who's ever loved someone they couldn't keep. Suddenly, the radio's sound was slightly distorted, then changed to another piece of music, a piano piece Arthur had written for me. No one but me knew the melody. The room was filled with music, warm as an old embrace. I heard Arthur smile through the speakers. "Evelyn, it's time." "Time for what?" I asked softly, as if speaking to nothing. His voice answered, as light as a breath. "To rest." I held Chloe's hand tightly. She asked, trembling, "Did you hear that too?" I nodded, tears falling without feeling sad. "Yes, sweetie, and it's okay." Then the radio went silent. No more music, no more static, no signal. Only the small red light was still on, flashing steadily, like a weak heartbeat. Chloe looked at me, worried. "Is it broken?" "No," I said softly. "He's just saying goodbye." It was silent. We sat there until late at night, in the quiet room filled only with the sound of falling rain. I put my hand on the radio, whispered, "Good night, Arthur. I'll listen again tomorrow." But deep down I knew there would be no tomorrow. That was the last night of the broadcast. It was also the night he really left, for the second time. The next morning the radio wouldn't turn on. Chloe tried everything, changing the batteries, plugging them in, tapping them, opening the cover. Nothing changed. I just looked at her, smiling. "It's fine. He stayed long enough." She looked up, tears in her eyes. "You mean he left?" "No," I said softly. "He just finally rested." That night, Chloe couldn't sleep. She wrote something in her notebook, then said softly, "I think I understand now. Love doesn't fade. It just changes its form." I nodded, my voice choking. "That's right, dear. And sometimes love sounds like static on an old radio." 3 days had passed since the night the radio went silent. I hadn't touched it again. Every time I saw the little red light go out, my heart sank. But strangely, I didn't feel empty. It was as if Arthur was still somewhere in this house, only I couldn't hear it anymore. Chloe stayed with me for a few days. She cleaned, cooked, and sometimes sat quietly in front of the radio. She didn't say anything, didn't turn it on, just sat and watched. I knew she was trying to understand something I'd understood a long time ago, that sometimes love doesn't need to be expressed out loud. That night I was tired and had to go to bed early. Chloe sat alone in the living room. It was raining lightly. She said she was reading a book when she suddenly heard a very small sound, like an old radio wave. She looked up. The red light on the radio came back on. "Grandma?" she called softly. But I was asleep. She stepped closer, shaking as she turned the knob. The familiar static sounded. Then Arthur's deep voice spoke, clearly. "Good evening, little one. Take care of her for me." Chloe stood still. "Grandpa?" His voice was gentle, as if he were smiling. She waited long enough. "Tell her it's time to rest." Then the signal died. Nothing more, only the sound of falling rain, and the red light flashed one last time, then went out completely. The next morning, I found Chloe sitting by the radio, her eyes red. She looked at me for a long time, then said softly, "Grandma, he talked to me." I smiled, my hand trembling as I stroked her hair. "I know, dear. He finally found his way to you. He told me to take care of you. Then promise him you will." He nodded, hugging me tightly. I could hear his heart beating, young, strong, full of life, and my heart, strangely peaceful. That night, I didn't turn on the radio anymore. Chloe made tea, brought it out, and sat next to me by the window. It was raining again. The drops of water falling on the porch roof made a steady sound, like the old radio waves. I closed my eyes and whispered, "You know, Chloe, love never really ends. It just finds new voices." He squeezed my hand and softly replied, "Then maybe now he's speaking through me." I smiled, tears falling. "Yes, dear, and you sound just like him." As night fell, I heard the sound of the wind and waves outside the porch, mingling with my breathing. The radio was gone, but I could still hear it clearly, a familiar voice, gentle, affectionate. "Good night, Evelyn." I smiled. "Good night, Arthur." And in that moment I realized some farewells don't end with silence, but with a voice that still echoes in the hearts of those left behind. Tea, and put 2 cups on the table, one for me, one for him. Habits never change, even though the person sitting across from me has been gone for 30 years. I looked over at Chloe. She was still sleeping on the sofa, her face as peaceful as an old photograph. I felt strangely relieved, no longer afraid of the night, no longer waiting for that voice. I knew if love could go that far, then I could follow it too. I sat down next to the radio and turned it on. No more static, no lights, no waves. Just a strangely warm silence. I said softly, my voice very small, "Arthur, if you're still listening, I'm coming home." A gentle breeze blew through the window. The scent of lavender filled the room. I leaned my head back in the chair, closed my eyes, and smiled. And in that moment, I heard something no one else would have believed. "Welcome home, Evelyn." His voice, so close, so clear, as if he were sitting right next to me. I didn't open my eyes. I just clenched my fists in the air and whispered, "I've missed you." "I know," he replied, his voice fading into the wind. "Now rest. I'll take it from here." The next morning, Chloe woke up. She sat quietly by the window, eyes closed, a very slight smile. The cup of tea beside her was still warm. The room was quiet. Only the morning sunlight shone through the white curtains. Chloe called softly, "Grandma?" There was no answer, but when she looked at the radio, the small red light suddenly lit up. Chloe froze. The familiar crackle sounded. And then, not Arthur's voice, but a soft, warm female voice. "Good evening. This is Evelyn Moore, and tonight I'll tell you a story about love that never fades." Chloe put her hand to her mouth, tears welling up in her eyes. It was her voice, Grandma Evelyn's voice, warm, gentle, and calm as a lullaby. "Love," she said into the radio, "isn't about staying forever. It's about leaving a part of yourself behind, so the one you love never feels alone." Chloe sat down, bursting into tears, laughing as she said, "Good night, Grandma." The radio continued to play, steady, calm. Amidst the static and the background music, Chloe heard 2 voices blending together, Arthur and Evelyn co-hosting, as if they had found each other on different frequencies. That evening, Chloe set the radio on the table next to their wedding photo. The red light was still on, the low hum of the waves still playing, and in that moment, the little house at the end of Cedar Street was no longer a place of sadness, but a place of love, memory, and return.